Welcome to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, the only show that's going to teach you how to be somebody.
Thank you again. Appreciate your time. We're going to talk about the story of Cypress Semiconductor called 0 to a Billion.
You're not going to make it. It's not like being a star quarterback.
You guys are all leaders. You guys are trying to crush it.
Ladies and gentlemen, whatever's going on in your life, you're going to run into that block.
Recognize that you're leaving 95% of American business completely behind.
You guys are here learning, getting education.
You're going to run into someone standing there.
No. Michael Jordan's humility is what we're talking about.
Saying to you, you're not good enough to get through to the other side. And I say to you, let's roll, baby. Let's roll.
Welcome to Winners, Wallets, Worldviews. Joining me on the other end, we got Tyson Koska, and we're going to talk about business, small business, entrepreneurship, and leadership today. So Tyson, I really appreciate it. Welcome to the show.
AJ, thanks for having me.
Hey, can you, just for everybody's kind of background, just give a little kind of professional bio or background of yourself, where it kind of all started for you?
Yeah, sure. I got started in the entrepreneur game pretty early. I grew up lower middle class, didn't have a lot of money, didn't have like a good steady allowance each week or anything to have my own money.
Kind of the salt of the earth kind of narrative, right? Kind of
right.
The classic situation.
And not only that classic situation, but also living in a pretty affluent neighborhood.
Sure.
So we were like the poor. There was two sides of our street. There was the poor side, and then there was the new development with the wealthier kids. And so riding the school bus with those guys. I mean, we're in school the whole time. It was just I always wanted some. Not that, I mean, my parents were awesome, supportive, loving, caring family, but I just wanted more money. I wanted to have more toys. And so when I was 13, I started. Now you're in Wisconsin, right?
Yeah.
Right. So you probably don't have these, but here in Maryland on the East Coast, we take crushed ice and put sugar water on it, and we call them snowballs. And
we call them snow cones.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, but very familiar. Yeah.
Okay. So I had a stand during the summer. I started when I was 13, and I did it all through the summer. When I was 13, 14, and 15. And each summer I made about $500. The first summer I bought my own computer, taught myself how to program. And I got that taste of like having your own money, being financially independent from your parents.
How old did you say you were when this was going on?
13.
13. Okay.
Yeah. So this is back in the early 80s. So it was just, once you got that taste of having that little extra scratch and that independence, it just, that feeling has stayed with me, my entire life.
Yeah. Well, I always find it interesting that most of the entrepreneurs I talk to on this show seem to, it dates back to their childhood. There was some kind of, small business or lemonade stand, if you will, that they kind of used or started or developed when they were just a kid. And it's kind of carried through in their life. I wonder if that's like if entrepreneurship in a way is like a born thing, or if you learn it, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's probably, I can definitely see where it can come from a lack of having or a want of wanting, and that getting ingrained. But I don't think that's the primary driver. I think there also has to be a sort of a natural spark, an independent spark. I think a lot of entrepreneur types are folks that just can't stand the thought of sitting in a cube for 8 or 10 hours a day, and just, want to have a little bit more freedom and independence in their lives in general.
Yeah. There's some kind of ambition, that seems to drive them. They're optimistic, forward thinking.
Definitely on the optimism side for sure.
Yeah.
I've yet to meet a successful entrepreneur who's not just an inveterate optimist, trying to see the good parts and also willing to help others. Like you always get this idea sometimes in business that people are cutthroat, or and I'm sure that there are, I'm sure, but the most successful people that I know are very giving, very caring people.
All right, give me 1 second. I'm just going to disconnect this VPN here so that goes a little faster. But yeah, so one thing that I think is kind of interesting with the optimism side of entrepreneurs. So this is funny because we're going through just some like banking situation, we're refinancing some things, and I just see nothing but the upside. Like, yeah, this is going to be fantastic or whatever. But then you've got these banker types, obviously, that are so much more conservative and pessimistic and looking at every different avenue to go wrong, and very well should look at things that way. Otherwise banking would not work very well if they were super bullish on every decision. What do you think is kind of like a good way to look at life? Because as an entrepreneur, you got to be optimistic, but you also got to be aware of risk and how to analyze that. Where do you kind of stand on that?
Well, it's interesting that you put it that way, because I'm exceedingly optimistic. I feel like, given the right opportunity, can make things work. But from a financial or from a business planning perspective, I'm exceedingly conservative. Even in my personal life, even in the assumptions I make about the business going forward, I always take a conservative view, because businesses get disrupted, things never go as planned, and if you exceed your goals, well, then that's great. Then you can do maybe something else. Not maybe I shouldn't say exceedingly conservative, but I definitely bend to the conservative side. Sure.
Well, I want to piggyback on that, but I think I interrupted the original question, which was, what was kind of your background? So you're an entrepreneur since you were a kid, clearly, and then you kind of, where did you go from there? And then I want to come back to this idea of your conservative kind of leanings in how you allocate resources.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, I got that bug early, that financial independence bug, and then I ended up. I told you, I shared with you already that I was sort of in that lower tier income wise. And I graduated high school, and all my friends were going out of state, going to college, living in the dorms, just like the 80s college movies that you see, except I wasn't. My parents said, well, if you live at home and you go to a local school, we'll pay half. And then you can work to pay the other half. And I thought, man, that's not what I want. Like, these kids are like doing this stuff in the movies, John Hughes movies.
Van Wilder, yeah, that's my generation.
Yeah, right, yeah. This is a different generation, right? And I ended up going to an Army recruiter and talking about what they had to offer. And he took the ASVAB test, which is a test that everyone that is going through the recruiting process takes. And I scored well. And he said, we have this program. It's called High School to Flight School, and you would basically, if you get in, you would go to basic training, and then after basic training, you would go to flight school, and you get paid as a sergeant E5, and after flight school, you would be a warrant officer, and you would have a 6-year total commitment, and then when you get out, you can have the full GI Bill. And I was like, well, that's it. That's it right there. That's what I want to do. So I applied for that. It took about a year to get in, but that was the path I took.
So where did you go from there? So did you end up becoming a warrant officer? Did you fly?
Yeah, I did.
Wow. Okay. You didn't give me the warrant officer vibes, usually the super ultra chill, kind of like I was on a ride one time. I think we were in like Blackhawks or something. And, you plugged into the headset and everything. And there was like something that was going wrong when we were flying. And the warrant officer's like, yeah, we're just going to go put this thing down over here. Like, just totally chill. I'm like, dude, this thing could be going down. He's like, yeah, I think we're just going to put her down over here.
Yeah.
It's like the chillest voice I've ever heard. I'm like, that's just the warrant officer vibe, man.
And when you're in the cockpit or that doesn't have to be, but in a high pressure situation, that's definitely the way my psyche reacts. The more freaky and crazy things get, the more like that old training, that pilot training kicks in, and you just cool everything down and take it really, really easy.
Do you think that was a learned thing, or were you always like that?
I think I don't know, to be honest with you, but you're right. It is a typical trait that pilots in general have, is this, as things get more, because if a pilot starts freaking out, you're really in trouble,
right?
And so and we did, in flight school, imagine. So do you know what autorotation is in a helicopter?
No.
Okay, so when you're
I can assume, but you could explain better. Probably.
Sure. So it's much safer. Most people don't know this. It's much safer if you're in a helicopter to lose an engine, even if there's only one engine, than you are in a fixed wing aircraft and you lose an engine, which is a little bit counterintuitive. People think if you lose an engine in a helicopter, you're done. But in a plane, at least you've got some wings. which what most people don't realize is the rotor system spinning around and around. That's basically a giant wing. And as you fall, if you flatten out the blades on the helicopter, all the air that's coming up as you're going toward the ground makes the blade spin faster, 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 and faster. And in fact, you've got to, in an engine out situation, you've actually got to monitor your rotation speed of the rotor, because it can go too fast and everything can fly apart. So you've got to constantly be bleeding off speed on your rotor blades. And so in an engine out situation, you flatten the wings, you turn into the wind, and you look for a place to land. And you can glide it like a fixed wing aircraft. You can glide the helicopter down as long as you've got wind coming up through your blades. And then as you get closer to the ground, you pull back on the cyclic, and which causes you to go nose up, and then you flatten. And as you come to the ground, you pull up, and all that speed that was saved up in your rotor system, you pull up on the collective, boom, it creates a cushion of air, and you can land just as soft as you want. So I bring up that story because we were asking about being chill in emergency situations. We would regularly be flying, and the pilot, the instructor would just cut the engine as you're flying, as you're hovering out to take off, as you're coming in for a landing, as you're just flying. They just cut the engine at random times, and you have to flatten the collective. You would say, okay, engine's out, flatten the collective. I'm turning into the wind. So you always have to know which direction the wind is coming from. I'm turning into the wind there. And then you have to indicate to the instructor, I'm going to land right there. And then you would come to, and they would let you get 10 or 15 feet off the ground. And then they would turn the engine back on and fly away. Or sometimes if you were at an airfield, you would actually land it. And we did this hundreds of times. So you're asking me whether it's learned or whether it's training. There is definitely a big training component to it, to be sure.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it's just kind of having a plan with the outcome, right? So like having a control over the situation, knowing what could happen, knowing what your options are, having a lot of confidence in yourself, in your training, gives you that ability to be so chill. That's wild. I mean, just cutting an engine like that, but it's the understanding of, well, okay, now what are my options? And I have a plan of what I can do or contingency if this goes down.
And I'm going to tie that back a little bit with my current entrepreneurial venture. It's all about having a plan, because I really believe that once you have the plan, you're ready for the instructor to take off, to cut the engine at any time. Now, my current thing is different than my other thing, but it is really all about making a plan, because then you have the freedom to be chill, right? Then you have the freedom because you know, even if disaster strikes, I got this.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's pretty interesting. What other stories did you have that when you were just kind of as a pilot? Anything wild and crazy? Other than getting the engine cut on you and training?
we would do, outside of flight school, I'm not sure I should share them. I'll tell you more from flight school because they're also instructive. But because we used to challenge, so I'll just give you a little taste. We used to challenge ourselves and do things that weren't strictly, we weren't supposed to really be doing. Because we were always trying to push each other and push the ability to handle the aircraft. I used to fly an OH-58, which is a Kiowa in the civilian world. And when you're hovering, it tilts so that it's left and forward a little bit. So you could actually, when you touch down, the left front skid would always touch down, and then you would settle the aircraft. So we used to go out in the snow and play tic-tac-toe in the snow and see who could hover and create a tic-tac-toe board. But anyway, in flight school, something that I learned, and this happened to me twice, I had gotten to the point where I was going to, so you're allowed to be held back twice. And twice I was in a position of getting held back because I was not able to execute physically certain maneuvers. And I was always very good at learning the rules and the regulations and all of that stuff. But I just happened to be not a very coordinated guy. I was never much on sports, and I just had a really, really hard time. You're supposed to solo after your first 2 weeks of training. You're supposed to solo, and what solo means, in at least when I was going through, was that you and your stick buddy the instructor would literally leave the aircraft. You have to pick up the aircraft, taxi it out to the runway, get clearance from the tower, take off, circle around the airfield, come in for a landing, and land and taxi back to the parking spot. That was called soloing. And I got grouped up with this guy who was quite good. He learned hovering very quickly. He learned how to taxi and hovering are the hardest things, and he learned that stuff very well. Forward flights, it's not too bad. And I was just having a really, really hard time. I couldn't because I don't know how much you know about flying helicopters, but you've got your feet, which control the tail rotor. So that's like how you're pointing. You've got the cyclic, which is your left, your right, your forward, and your back. And then you've got your collective, which is up and down. And every time you make an adjustment to one of them, it changes the airflow through the rest of the system, and so you've got to make an adjustment. So it's not like you're moving one thing at a time. You move one thing, you got to move something else. But then when you move that something else, it causes something else. So it's like when you were learning how to drive, and you thought to yourself, why don't people just hold the steering wheel straight and just drive? When you're driving, you're always making little mini corrections. I used to ask my dad, why are you constantly moving the wheel? Why don't you just keep it like going down the road? He's like, it doesn't work that way. There's always adjustment. Same thing with a helicopter, but it's 3 different sets of controls, and it's both your feet, both your hands. So I was having a hard time. And frankly, my instructor, the day before we were supposed to solo, he said, hey, if you do not show me something that you haven't showed me, if you don't do something new and different today, I'm going to have to recommend that you get held back. And I was like, okay, got to do what you got to do. And it turns out it was like the windiest day since we had been flying. And wind is not a helicopter's friend. If it hits the left, you've got to take up, and then the wind dies down, and then the wind shifts. And it makes what was like these little mini corrections, it makes it like much bigger corrections constantly. And he's like, I don't want to put you on the spot. Your stick buddy can go first. And so this is like the final check ride before he signs off on your solo the next day. So my stick buddy gets there, he picks up the aircraft, and he's like all over the place. He's like buffeting left, right. And we get out to the taxi lane, and we take off, and we go around the airfield, and he comes in, and my instructor looks at him and goes, oh my gosh, what's wrong? Do you have a case of the Tysons? And I was like, oh, this is great. So, now I got to sit in the seat, and I'm just like, a part of me was just like, you know what? I'm done. But it doesn't, I couldn't do it before. I'm certainly not going to be able to do it now. So what do you got to lose? I picked it up. And do you remember the moment where you learned how to ride a bike?
Yeah.
You went from this to, it clicks, right? It's just it's like an instant moment in time. I picked it up. At first gust of wind came to the left side, and I was like, and I was like a rock. The bird just sat there, just wouldn't move. He's looking at me. I can see him looking at me out the corner of his eyes. I call the tower. I get clearance to taxi. I move out. I go out to the runway. I take off. I circle. I bring it in. I drive. He never said a word to me the entire flight. I put it down. He's like, okay, you got it. You can solo tomorrow. And so the next day we both did our solo ride. Like my buddy did make it through. And we both did our solo rides. And it was that moment of giving up. It happened to me again. I'm not going to bore you with the whole story, but it happened to me again in flight school that somehow it's not logical. I have no idea how it works. I'm sure you've read about it in motivational books, but it's a real thing that just not surrendering, that's just accepting and just going with what goes and knowing that failure is fine too.
Yeah. Wow. That's really incredible. I didn't know that about you. And I think it's really interesting, the analogy that flying kind of has, right? Because it's obviously a live or die situation every time you do it. But that's really fascinating. I mean, so what happens now after you kind of, so you serve in the Army for some time,
right?
And then was that career unique to you at all, or was anything interesting about the time in the Army?
It was, in the Army
that's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, so the time in the Army was basic training, warrant officer candidate school in in Lower Alabama,
Yep.
a year of flight school, then instantly to Korea for a year, and then to Germany. And then Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. So I end up in Saudi and Iraq for half a year, and then back to Germany. At that time, I was supposed to serve 6 years, but they had an early out program, and I applied. I got out 2 years early. So at 23 years old, I was a high school graduate that had been an Army officer and a helicopter pilot in a combat zone, and was now a freshman in college. It was just like my head was spinning. I didn't, it was a weird time. So what I learned a lot. I mean, self-reliance and ability to persevere and do things you didn't think you were capable of. I ironically, in the military, I got into huge financial debt, thousands of dollars of credit card bills, could barely make minimum payments, was just making mistakes left and right. Remember, I talked about that financial independence thing. I was not financially independent. I made all the classic young kid goes into the military buying vehicles and
payday loans and 21% interest on
yeah,
cars.
they didn't have, luckily they didn't have them back then. Yeah, good thing. Yeah, video cameras and stereos and leather jackets. And I mean, you name it, I had it. But by the time I got out, I had, because I was in that first Gulf War, couldn't spend my money. No shopping malls in the desert. Couldn't, and in the combat zone. Paid off all those credit, luckily paid them all off. Came out of the Army with a couple of grand in savings and a brand new mindset toward money, realizing that it's really, really easy to get in trouble, even when you're making decent money.
Yeah. So then where'd you go to school? What'd you study?
So I ended up, so this is another really, really ironic part of the story. As I told you, my parents said, well, if you stay at home and work, we'll pay half your tuition. And if you go to someplace local. So after all of that just happened, I'm 23 years old. I applied to the exact college they wanted me to go to. And I lived in my parents' basement and I worked full time.
Yeah. That's a financially good way to do it.
I did everything that they wanted me to do, but I did it on my own terms.
So when did the, your company kind of, or when did you start the entrepreneurial process after school?
That was so after school, I ended up getting degrees, useless degree. Well, I say useless. They taught me how to think instead of teaching me what to think. I have degrees in philosophy and in English. And and after that, I ended up teaching at a computer learning center because I knew I had always been very much into computers. I had taught myself to program when I was 13. After that first summer of the snowball stand, I bought my computer. So I had those skills in my back pocket, and so I took I went the academic route. I taught in a computer learning center. And I just increasingly got more technical. And after a while, I thought, I really don't want to teach. I'd rather just do things. So I ended up in IT. I was a programmer. I was a project manager. I was a business analyst. I did everything in IT for 25 years. But all during that period, I was constantly working on little little software projects. I came out with, I worked on a program that back tested the stock market and looked for different ways to trade stocks so that, you could just, the program would recommend what to do on a daily basis. It didn't work, but I worked on it really hard for a long time. I was always into long-term financial projections, which is where I ultimately ended up anyway. Right. But I was also really busy being in corporate IT, and it paid well. And so there wasn't a whole lot of incentive. I never hit on a really special idea. I always was working, creating things, looking for the thing. But literally over a course of 20 years, I didn't really hit on it. The one thing that I did end up doing was something that I figured it was such a no-brainer that someone in the financial space would invent it. And that is basically a tool that lets you say, oh, well, here's my current income streams. Here's my spouse's income streams. Here are my current expenses. Here's what I think my future expenses. I want to send my kids to college. I have a 401k, or here are my, here are the contributions, and just a way to toggle the numbers around and just like see how the chart like changed over time, like something really interactive, really visual, and really for a consumer. And I thought it would get created. There were applications like Quicken or Microsoft Money, or even later there was websites like Mint.com.
Yeah.
But still, none of these sites did anything more than like a maximum 6 month or a 1 year projection. I wanted a 50-year projection, but not like a retirement calculator, not something like that where they ask you, how much do you make? And then they say, okay, you need $2 million and then you can be comfortable. Like, I wanted something in between the two, something that was granular enough that I could put in real life situation, real life assumptions, future assumptions, and then also a 50-year plan. And that's it. I literally just got tired of somebody to write it and started working on it myself.
And that's what became Trajectory, right?
OnTrajectory, yeah.
OnTrajectory, which is what you're known for now. And what like insights did you learn from kind of the personal finance side? So you've got like this business, but I'm just kind of curious to just know a little bit. You mentioned you went from this place of kind of, when you were in the Army, the classic, soldier gets into financial issue. But you came out of that, and what was your kind of philosophy surrounding just financial planning before you kind of embarked on this OnTrajectory journey?
Right. So that's a really good question, because my philosophy was just get stressed out about every purchase and think I should be saving more. And that was just my mindset. I was like, I wanted to enjoy things. I didn't want to be a cheapo. I wanted to be, I wanted to do what my friends were doing. I wanted to enjoy life, but every purchase, like every little purchase was like, do I really need this? Do I need it? And I was just like, I was sick to my stomach of like getting stressed out about where is my money taking me? What is the path that I'm on? And so until I made the software, I had spreadsheets and I had, different ways of looking at the money and just basically trying to maximize saving, feeling both like I was spending too much and feeling like I was cheap at the same time. So there was that tension going on in my life. And this software, literally, I created it for myself so that I could get the numbers out of my head. I could see exactly where I'm going. I knew exactly when I would be comfortable enough to quit the day job and have a little bit less, pressure on trying to maximize my income. I was constantly looking for the biggest raise. I was constantly doing work that I thought would pay off. I was always pushing that envelope, but I didn't even know if I needed to. I didn't know if that was even the right thing to do. So so writing this software was for my own peace of mind. Like, I wanted to get it all out of my head. And so my approach was be constantly stressed out about money. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but 73% of Americans say that money stress is the number one stress in their lives.
I believe it. Yeah.
And but what this software does, or it did for me, and it does for a lot of other people, it takes that stress away. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't give you more money. It doesn't change your investments, but it gives you a visualization, and it gives you a path that you can see and a goal that you can define. And then you can track your progress along the way to make sure you're on it. And once you've done that legwork, once you've done those things, then that money stress it goes away, because you don't have to, can I buy the latte? Can I not buy the latte? Like, yeah, you can buy the latte, or no, you can't. Or can I buy a boat? No, you cannot buy the boat. I mean, the questions are answered and you know what decisions you can make. And as long as you can get behind that emotionally, you don't have to feel cheap. You don't have to feel anything. You're just like, this is just the facts. This is my goal at the end, and this is how I'm going to get there.
Do you think so? When did this happen? Like, when did you start this business, and when were you working in your corporate job?
Sure. Well,
how long was this?
So I founded the company in 2014, basically around the time that my second daughter was born. I realized, because I was living in a small row house in downtown Baltimore, and had one car and no yard, and second child was just like, I got to move out to the burbs, need some green space, need another car, need a different kind of suburban lifestyle, and didn't know how much house should I buy? How much car should I buy? Should I go, anyway, these parameters. Can I still contribute to my 401k? Do I need to put more in college savings? Like all these questions just built up. And I was like, you know what? Forget it. I'm gonna make the software that I've always dreamed of. I did a prototype. I went to some programmer friends of mine that I worked with. Their first reaction was, oh, well, this has to exist. I said, look, if it exists, please point me to it. I don't have to write the software. They went out. They're like, no, doesn't exist. So we started it in 2014. We all had our corporate jobs. We worked nights and weekends for a year, and we would. So they lived in New York. I lived in Baltimore. We would meet in a hotel room on the side of the Jersey Turnpike and just code all weekend and never leave the hotel room except for Taco Bell in the middle of the night and maybe a stop at the liquor store. And did that for about a year. Then we released the beta version, which was really rudimentary, and we stuck it out there. I don't know. Have you ever heard of the FIRE community?
I don't think so.
So FIRE stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. And if you Google it, you'll see it's a big community of people that trade tips and tricks for reaching financial independence early, techniques, retiring early, that kind of thing. And so we sort of, that's the community that we fit well with because of people that care enough to actually make a long-term plan. And we got a lot of encouragement. We got a lot of suggestions. We got a lot of pressure to make the tool a little bit different. And eventually what happened is over the years, 2014, 15, 16, people started coming up to say, well, I want my advisor to have this tool as well. And we had advisors, smaller people that didn't necessarily have like a corporate like software package. You're like, we love how fast and easy you can make a long-term projection, but I have like 20 clients. How do I use it for 20 clients? So we made an advisor version. And then eventually we had an investor that came to us and said, hey, we want to invest in this because you guys are approaching this problem of financial planning from a consumer's perspective, but the tool is powerful enough that it can be used to actually give advice and advisors and money coaches can use it. And that's where we are now. We took an investor came on board last year. We're working on iterating what we've got, making it more solid, doing a lot more marketing than we ever did before. Things like this podcast, for example. Yeah. And that's the stage that we're at, the growth stage.
That's it's really interesting, kind of hearing a business that's in the growth stage. You get a lot of people on a podcast that have kind of exited or they're starting something new or whatever. But that's kind of interesting. Within the last year, you had kind of received your investment. What's like your kind of goal with it? What's your end goal?
Well, it is, there's
like a 5 and out.
So it's really interesting because I feel like as long as I'm really enjoying it, really like actually viscerally helping people and hearing their stories and adding features and functions that make it interesting and make the tool valuable, I feel like I could do that for a while. I mean, I'm 54, so I'm definitely not a young guy, but I feel like that would be kind of fun. But as soon as it starts to feel like work, as soon as it's like gets really, if it gets political or if we get bought by a big entity and there's different pressures, then I probably would not be interested in staying with it. So as long as I can really feel like I'm affecting real people's lives and I'm enjoying it, I don't have a particular timeline. But you know what? If Fidelity came to me tomorrow and offered me a huge number, it's a different story too.
Yeah, no kidding. So when, I don't know if you mentioned it already or not, but like when did you make the leap from a corporate position at some point, and what was that like?
Several times. So I can tell you what the software has done for me. So I started it in 2014. I had my corporate job up until 2018, and I was like, you know what? I'm looking at my trajectory on OnTrajectory. I pulled my wife into my office. I said, honey, look where we are. I can quit. And if I can grow the business by X amount within a year, then I can just stay doing this. And here's the math. Here's the chart. She could see it. It's visual. It's right in front of you. And she's like, okay, if you think so, let's do it. So I quit my corporate job, my very well-paid corporate job in 2018, and got to the end of 2018. And I just was not able to grow the business fast enough. And so I remember she comes into my office. It's like November, December. She's like, so how we doing? And I'm like, well, I'm probably going to have to get a day job. Here's the numbers. Here's the curve. Here's all the math. Here it is in OnTrajectory. She's like, what are you going to do? I was like, I know, this was fully expected. If I wasn't able to grow it, market it in a way that, really moved the needle. I have to mention marketing is not really my strong suit. And so I did. I went back to corporate IT. I did it for almost 2 years. Pulled my wife in my office one day and said, honey, look at the chart. I can quit again in 2020. She's like, well, she's looking at the chart. She's looking at the curve. She's like, if you think we can do it, we can do it. I said, okay, let's do it. So I quit again in 2020. We got our investor in 2021, and now we're good to go.
Wow. That's interesting because you also it's a hard decision, I think, for people to make, right?
I would never have made it. I mean, I would never have quit my 6-figure income and literally made nothing and pulled from family savings for a year without having the confidence, of working out all the math. It's scary. It's scary as hell. And you're doing it every month. You're pulling it out. And you're like, oh man, this is terrible. Why am I, my kids could have had this, or this could have been, I could have grown this into something really big later in life. But yeah, it's scary.
Well, there's so much conflicting advice on how to do it. Right. So half the people are telling you to do something kind of like what you did, which is here's the math, this is kind of when you're in a financial position that would make sense to stop, or if you have some clear goals, you can try to work on it. And then other people are just like, no, just go all in and just hustle. And if you lose it all, you got to try, and it's like, who do you listen to? I don't know.
That's one. And you know what, honestly, that's one of the money stressors in people's lives. It's like you look on the internet, you pick up, a newspaper, and you've got all these conflicting. This is what I think is really crazy. Not only do you get conflicting advice from different people within the same news feed, but then the fine print of every article is, this is not investing advice. All decisions are yours, and every situation is different. It's like, well, the reason that I'm reading this, the reason I'm asking you is because I want to know my situation. Like, every situation is different. You got to figure out what works for you. No, I don't want to figure out what works for me. I need advice to help what works for me. But that blurb is at the end of every article. Yeah. Again, it's another reason why people need to invest a little in their own education and see what that, I don't think, honestly, if you look at my investment portfolios, you go, dude, that is the laziest portfolio I've ever seen. I've got 3 things that I hold. Yeah. It's actually called a lazy portfolio if you look it up, because I'm not into investing. I'm not into maximizing my returns and day trade. No. I know generally what the market's going to do over time. I know about dollar cost averaging. I know about the power of compound interest, and that's all I need to know. And I'm good to go. And it served me well. Again, this is not investing advice. I have to make that caveat. Yeah. But you don't have to be super knowledgeable to make yourself a good financial plan.
Well, so on that note, and that brings us back to, I think, one of the questions I had before, kind of this conservative investing style that you use with your own personal finance. As a business owner or business leader controlling a big checkbook, I think one of the hardest parts about running a business is trying to figure out where you're going to spend money, because you can justify almost anything to spend money on. And the best business leaders are the ones that are like, we're not spending it here, we're going to spend it here. What's your approach to thinking through that, of where to spend money?
Yeah. And I'll just actually raise one. I will answer the question, I promise, but I'm going to raise one more piece of complexity to that question, because sometimes you get people offering you money and there's certain terms on that money. Yeah. And so you're like, oh, I could take $1 million from this resource over here. But then you got to think through, well, what is that $1 million going to buy you? What are you going to get back with that money? Yeah, it's easy to spend. I can spend it all, but am I going to spend it in a way where I get a return for that? Because if I just spend their money and I give up equity in my company, all I've done is just diluted myself. I don't get anything for it. So it's whether it's money that you already have, or maybe it's the income that's coming in, maybe it's investments. Now back to your question, how do you make that decision? And the way I always look at it is, what's the upside? What am I going to get in return for spending this money. If the money's not going to get me anything, then I'm not going to spend it. And sometimes you don't know the answer to that question. So you've got to do small things. Am I going to do pay-per-click advertising? Am I going to run an ad over here? Or am I going to hire somebody to work on design? Is design going to get me more customers? So you got to take, like, the way I do it is I do a little one. I do a little experiment. I do a pilot. And if I don't see any movement, if it's just a cost sink, then, maybe I'll iterate on it. Maybe I'll try it again later. But that's what you want to do. You want to craft something that's bite size. You want to set an expectation and measure the expectation. Rinse and repeat. And that if you follow that path, maybe I'm wrong because that approach takes some time, but you'll be successful. The other way to look at it is if you've got a big, audacious, potentially disruptive idea, then you take that $1 million, you go balls to the wall and you try to make it happen. But it's a riskier way. I'm a little bit, luckily now, I'm a little bit more risk averse, but my investor is not. And so we're actually got a two-pronged attack here. He's sort of leading the strategic, big visionary, disruptive element of the business. And I'm leading the, hey, how do we make people's lives better? How do we make the tool more valuable? How do we continually to add value to people's lives, both for the consumers and the professional advisors? So I'm kind of leading that element and he's leading the other element. And so, we've got that good mix going.
Yeah, I think that is a good strategy. Just like, even in my business, it's just, one of your employees will say, hey, we need this new software, or we need this new thing, or this new piece of equipment, or this new gear, or whatever. And every decision is just like, well, how exactly is that going to make me $1 more? And that's just the question I try to ask all the time. It's like, how is this going to make me $1 more? Can I see a really clear path to it? Or is it kind of a blurry path, or is there no path?
Yeah. And the thing is, you don't even have to get you don't have to get locked into tactical thinking or short-term thinking. You can say, oh yeah, this investment, it's not going to pay off in 6 months or a year, but in 2 years or 3 years, this investment will pay off. I think what you said is really important. Is it a clear path? Is it a fuzzy path? Or is there no path? And if you can get into that, I think it's a really good way to look at it. Those three, and then you help you make a decision, again, whether it's tactical or strategic.
Oh yeah. Like, for example, like with the property, it's like real estate seems black and white to me. This is how you make money in it. Clear path. Great. So I put a lot of money into real estate types of things. I'm very bullish on real estate investments. A lot of people know me or listen to this show, know that. Right. But other stuff, when we're just like we fell ass backwards in all this media work we're doing. Right. So it's like the difference between a Sony A7 II camera and this lens versus my iPhone. I don't know. Yeah, we might need some gear, but really the microphone we use for this podcast, most people probably can't tell when I'm using an SM7B versus my $100 Yeti, right? Obviously the audio nuts do, but it's just stuff like that, right? Every little decision is just like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
So it's I like the way you approach it though, is have these little kind of tests, these little guinea pigs that you can use, and you can kind of, and at the venture project, I always try to tell people, if you can use a snowball method, use it, which is what you're kind of describing. Try out your product. If you can't sell this to your neighbor, how are you going to sell this to mass markets? If you can't sell it in your local circles, if your friends aren't buying your Girl Scout cookies, how the hell are you going to sell these anywhere else?
Yeah. And that was, I'm glad you said that, because that was what actually was my trigger. I told you, I approached my friends about the idea and they're like, that has to exist. So first off, I was like, okay, they see a need.
Yeah.
And then B, they weren't able to fulfill it. And they're like, yeah, we're on board. And I was like, well, shit, if they're on board, then let's do this thing. Right.
Yep.
And actually we fueled each other for a long time, because it really did take us. 2014 was not yesterday. It did take us quite a while to get to the point where we were attractive enough. Now, part of it's our fault, because we spent a lot of our time just engineering and not doing market research and marketing and that sort of thing. We probably could have gotten here a lot quicker, but it was the path that we took, and ultimately it's worked out. So it's okay.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. I think that there's a lot of benefit to the there's kind of the snowball method in general, though, this kind of this slow build. You mentioned before that you had approached your friends, and one of the things that they said is this has to exist, right? And one thing I've been doing recently is I get business ideas all the time. Most of them go in a cage, and I leave them in there because it's just a distraction. But occasionally they might need to come out and integrate into something I'm working on. But if I get one that I think is never going to come out of the cage, I'll like tweet it out or Facebook or see something. One of these was a baby idea. It was like a baby product subscription box that uses like used clothes that you can send back and forth to each other, whatever. I tweet this out, and everybody's like kind of responding, oh, this exists already. This was on Shark Tank. This was already here. I'm like, well, that's great. And send me the link so I can buy it. And nobody sends the link. Like, it's just, that's the first thing. That's my first question. Every time someone says this exists out there, that's it. Send me the link. Send me a link right now. And if you can't find a link within 5 seconds, it's either poorly marketed or doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. So I think I can find a space in one of those. Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this is a great conversation today, Tyson. I wanted to ask you, just on a personal level, kind of what are your, kind of just personal habits? Well, like, you're running a business. You had a lot of really cool kind of experiences throughout your life in corporate IT, in the military as a pilot. What are some like habits that you have found are just great success tips that you believe in? So
I would say there's 2 pieces of advice I'll offer up. One you already touched on, which is breaking this, what you called snowball, breaking things down into smaller chunks. There's a great book, I think by Benjamin Hardy, called Willpower Doesn't Work. And he talks about how, willpower is like a muscle, and you can build it up over time if you work it the right way. But if you're depending on something and the only thing you're using is willpower, at some point that willpower is going to break, and the whole thing that you were trying to work on is going to fall apart, because you can't constantly depend on one muscle to do everything. It's going to get tired. It's going to get exhausted. So that taking things, not trying to affect change all at once, but by increments, I think is really important. The other thing I think is super, super important is learning how to get in the moment, to slow down your brain, to stop thinking about the future, stop thinking about the past, stop thinking about numbers every time you're trying to go have a meal with your family and look and get upset at the price. Either do it or don't do it. Get into the moment, even in your daily life, when you're doing something you just don't like doing. You're unloading the dishwasher, but you'd rather be doing anything else. Unload the dishwasher more slowly. Look at the dishes. I mean, it sounds really stupid. It sounds really silly. But if you slow down in the special times, you slow down in the unspecial time, you just slow down in general and live in the moment, it's going to enrich your life, I think, tremendously.
Do you have any tips on how to do that, other than just so you can kind of slow down? But I mean, I don't want to get into a long Zen discussion and meditation discussion. I'm definitely a proponent of. Now, I don't sit and meditate every day. I don't want you to think I'm like some guy like in lotus position going for 30 minutes. That's not me. Like that guy in Grandma's Boy. That's the CEO. And it's like, there's bad energy here. There's bad energy.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not what I'm talking about. But I am talking about standing in line at the grocery store, and that person that gets everything rung up, and then the cashier says, "Oh, that's $24.95," and the person goes, "Okay," reaches in, pulls out a checkbook, starts to write the name of you didn't know you were going to have to pay for this when you were waiting in line for the past 15 minutes. Like that moment, you learn how to breathe. You learn how to concentrate your focus on your inside. Maybe you even close your eyes and just forget about that person writing out that check. That is just incredibly infuriating. So I try to meditate when I'm feeling anxious like that, but I also try to meditate when I'm just sitting at my desk. I'll take a moment, focus on my breathing for a little while, or I have a hard time sleeping. So one thing that meditations really helped me do is what I used to do when I couldn't sleep, I would try to, whatever problem I was thinking about, I would try to solve it. And then if I solved it, I could go to sleep. Sometimes you know what? Don't even worry about the problem. The problem's still going to be there. Focus on your breath, focus on being in the moment. That kind of meditative perspective has really helped me. And I just feel like a much healthier person since I've adopted some of those habits.
Yeah, that seems to be a very common a very common practice, I think, for
It is. Yeah.
successful, busy people is they take, ironically, the busiest people seem to find 20, 25 minutes to kind of silence their thoughts, if you will, or at least do some kind of meditation or spiritual practice.
Have you ever tried it?
Yeah, I used to do it more religiously. Now I do it occasionally when I need to. And it's more subtle, I think, like what you're kind of describing, just moments of like, put the phone away, put electronics away. Don't let any of these dopamine engineered devices try to trigger you. Spend a few minutes just kind of staring at a wall or relaxing or taking some deep breaths with your eyes shut, and observing, not necessarily silencing thoughts, but observing them passively instead of just trying to control them or do something with them, but just kind of watching them go back and forth. That's been helpful.
Yep. Very wise. Very wise. Another trick that I use is noticing the richness of color. Not looking at what the things actually are around me, but like, oh my God, the vibrance of color is just so amazing. And that also helps to settle me sometimes.
I've been watching my 10-month-old son as he's learning about the world, and some things that are pretty funny. It's like you oddly start to reflect on being a child a lot, watching a kid. You probably know this a little bit, but is when he picks things up, sometimes he'll stare at them and then he'll get into like a very detailed piece of he'll hold like a little fuzzy, animal or something, right? And then he'll start looking at the fuzz in detail and putting his finger on it and just kind of observing it and studying it. And I used to think, when I was a little kid, I used to do stuff like that, is notice these really unimportant details about things. And when I can shut that away, I can do that in life when you're just kind of bored and you don't have a phone or anything distracting you and you're just staring out at a park and you're just looking at a tree and then you're just kind of staring at all these different things. You notice a remarkable amount of detail when you can pay attention. And these rich, successful people that I have had the privilege of running into mostly through this podcast seem to have an unbelievable propensity to pay attention and consume detail. And that's, I think, based on your ability to limit distraction and do things like being present, like you're saying, having an unbelievable ability to be where you are and observe it and comprehend it and process it accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's really, really wise. I hope all your all your listeners take that advice.
Yeah. Well, Tyson, brother, hey, this was a fantastic discussion today. Any other just last piece of advice you have for our audience today?
No, I'll give you my motto. My motto is, it'll all be okay in the end. If it's not okay, it's not the end.
Boom. That's pretty good. I like that one. What are you working on? How can people get in touch with you? I'm on your site right now. We got OnTrajectory.com. Obviously, this is a financial software people can use in small business or in personal finance, clearly. What's some other ways people can get in touch with you?
Sure. So obviously OnTrajectory.com, but you can reach me, TY@OnTrajectory.com, or just Google my name, Tyson Koska. You'll get LinkedIn or Facebook or what have you. So I'm around. I'm easy to find.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure we put all that in the show notes so you guys can follow up with him if you have specific questions. As always, you're listening to Winners, Wallets, and Worldviews, podcast on business, leadership, and life. Appreciate you all listening. Be somebody.